get unscripted creativity and brain power from the people who guide ADIA Lab and help us moving into the future. So with that, I'd like to ask as a starter, and we're going in order along the line here, a very hopefully obvious question. And this is, reflect please on the last 2.5 days and tell us one or two things that you have learned that were unexpected, surprising. And it doesn't need to be something you heard in a presentation, but maybe a random conversation or combining two facts that you've heard into a new insight so that we all benefit from your thoughts. Shafi.
Okay, thank you. In fact, I did not prepare. Should have done better homework. Okay, so to answer your question, sort of just the first thing that jumps to my mind was the presentation. I think on the second day, on the weather prediction, I thought that was very interesting. This sort of second story there, where he was using diffusion in order to do weather prediction in certain geographic locations, sort of inferring from others. In terms of sort of ideas of things to do in the future that have come up here as a result of conversations, I guess it's sort of has to do with health. So it's something that I'm curious about in any case, and I thought about it before, about doing analytics in a distributed platform, taking different types of bio research and medical records and linking them together to come up with some sort of analytics, possibly under privacy and enhancing technologies. But I want to link it together with a discussion that I had here in one of the breaks, and also with Edward's talk, with the idea that we don't just want to do research that has to do with furthering, let's say, drug discovery and so forth, but also with sort of making sure that we're sort of more resilient in the future, or saying it differently, using sort of the public health angle. So in other words, I think that this will offer an opportunity to predict what's coming and protect against it, rather than just cure diseases that we already incurred. So that's essentially what was the emphasis of Edward's talk. But I want to link it to research that I'm actually involved in Berkeley, which is research on resilience. So resilience more generally, not just in health, but in other topics, in other areas. So I'm working together with neuroscientists at Berkeley on this question about what makes species resilient to stress. Where stress could be due to aging, stress could be used to trauma, and we observe that certain people, certain animals, in animal experiments, react very negatively, to stress, and some seem to be unfeathered by it, and even remarkably, stress may even make them more vigorous. And it's a fascinating question: is what is this resilience, and where does it come from? And if we can understand it, maybe we can even think of methodologies to make people more resilient. And in general, resilience, is sort of, it's in many other areas of life. It's not just in health. You could talk about resilient economical systems. Resilience is actually a very big topic, which, because of a lot of things that have been said here, where we are sort of emphasizing doing better, being more efficient, being faster, having better AI systems, sometimes that's not necessarily consistent with resilience. So I think that that's something that has to come into the equation.
Thank you, Shafi. Marcus?
Thank you. I thought that this symposium was special. I'm sure all of you have attended to several conferences where the latest algorithm is presented, and you will see demonstrations of this algorithm being the best at this game or the best at this task. And those conferences are, of course, extremely relevant and important. But this symposium has been special. And what has made it special, in my view, is that it is a sort of conference, AI conference for adults, in the sense that we care about all of these breakthroughs, but we care about trustworthiness. And we care about ethical considerations. You saw this morning when the audience asked, but what will be the implications of this for truck drivers? We care about regulation. We care about how this will impact society in this way, for instance, in order to ameliorate the effects of climate change. And we care about how this is going to help us in drug discovery and how this is going to make our economy more efficient. So these are issues that are typically not discussed in other conferences. In other conferences, it's much more about the glitter and the promise and the most impressive result in a competition. And those conferences are exceptional and they are good and we should all attend to them. But I thought that this was special in that it looked beyond. It looked at what will be the implications of this technology and can we anticipate the governance and the management of some of those implications. And from that perspective, I thought that this conference was more of an AI conference for adults, and the adults being the audience.
Well, thank you, Marcus.
Interesting.
Alex?
Yes, thank you. Speaking of adults, we did see some children with extreme promise as well. Yeah, here is an example, right? Yeah, so anyway, what I wanted to say is that these were truly inspirational event, and I want to thank the operational board and advisory board for putting together such an interesting event. And themes which struck me most were that computational powers are increasing quite dramatically, which was emphasized in talks about weather prediction on the one hand, but also in Jack Dongara's survey of what is theoretically available. The complexity of the problems coming our way is also increasing exponentially. So basically it's a competition between what we can compute and what we need to compute, and it's not obvious who is going to have which side is going to have the upper hand. However, what is also clear to me is that we should try to articulate problems which are relevant and at the same time which we can take a handle, try to solve, giving remarkable new tools which are coming our way. So it's a combination of artificial intelligence and supercomputing and so on and so forth. But at the same time, we need to be very specific and we need to address problems which will affect, say, the economy, something which interests me most, but of course, health, of course, environment, of course, the attempt to reduce the climate change effects. So if one were to believe what Steve was saying, that we're going to hit 3 degrees, which probably he's right, I mean, then we need to put a lot of effort into building resilience into all stages of economic production and environment, and what Shafi just saying, studying what makes some individuals or some individuals say more resilient than others, and trying to emulate this trait. So in other words, I would say computational resources are very, very impressive, probably at the top of what was available throughout the history. The problems are also super complex, so maybe rather than trying to use super computation on something which is even more complicated, we should try to choose problems which we we can solve. So to go back to the old country where I'm from, there was this social realism, which was an uncompromised struggle between something which is excellent and something which is even better. So we should try to find something which is very complicated, but which we can solve with tools which are now excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Miguel?
This was an important symposium for me because it allowed me to observe causal inference from very different points of view. If you think about many of the problems that were discussed here, they are causal at core. And people are talking about them in different ways, with different language, using different names for similar concepts. They're talking about problems at different scales, with different type of data, different type of compute. But in a sense, it's like this is the story of the elephant and the three blind men that are touching at the elephant and trying to understand what that thing is. And we see that elephant, causal inference, from all these different points of view. We are helping each other, or at least it's helping me understand much better how many of these concepts and methods can be transferred across disciplines. We've learned about physical models, about accounting, about finance. There are a lot of issues in these fields that could be used for health, but are not being used now. And that's I think this is one of the main advantages of a symposium like this, that multidisciplinary aspect.
Thank you, Miguel. Steve?
Well, I'm going to start by picking up what Miguel said. For me, I'm not part of this community. I don't know, machine learning, artificial intelligence, or anything else like that. But to hear people talk about this, I was struck, for example, by the idea that you have these new drugs like Wegovy that help people lose weight, and also the food industry wants to counteract that with the magic ingredient that can override that so they can get fat again. But seriously speaking, for me, it's not only choosing problems that you can solve. For me, it's a much bigger deal to define a problem. And in physics especially, we have some fundamental equations that have been tested over and over again. Of course, it doesn't cover everything, but it covers a lot of things. But then you discover by observation, which you can either do an experiment or an experiment where you start, but you discovered it didn't work, but it did work, but it didn't work for the right reason. But what is the real reason? You can reach into the tool bag, but that tool bag is so rich and so deep that you don't know which pieces to pick. And so getting that solution is still an art in physics. And so every discovery I've made in my lab is, oops, surprise. You're not going to say, I'm not going to believe in quantum mechanics or Newton's laws or anything like that. You just say, I'm not thinking in the right way. The accidental discovery of CO2 capture, you started saying, oops, we actually stuck an amine on the molecule, expecting that the CO2 would go on the amine, and we thought we'll be clever and we can break that single bond and no other extraneous energy. It worked, except when we did the mass spec, there was no CO2 on the amine. So we said, what's going on? Take off the amine. It worked still the same. So it had nothing to do with that. As we try to figure out what was going on, the seeds of it was actually 80 years old. This activity factor, they kind of knew about, but no one's really thinking about it. And it doesn't show up in machine learning because the machine learning takes a consensus view of a majority view. And the really new things aren't that majority view. So I think I'm going to take away from this the idea that by looking at these other disciplines and cultures and attacks on problems, it can help me in my work, but in a very different way. I'm trying to think of how do you formulate new problems. And I'm going to throw out something, and maybe you can get ADIA Labs to consider this. There's an old problem, and it's a new problem, but it hasn't been adequately discussed, and that is, as every culture gets richer, they have fewer children. We used to have a lot of children because they were our social security, and half of them wouldn't make it past childhood. But now we realize, even with fewer kids, they're really expensive, and they hang around the house, and you still got to pay for them well past college, and so it's becoming a liability. That's one version. Another version is there's stuff to do at night, so you can do other things. But the reality is we're having fewer children, and many economists say, "Oh, that's bad. You need more children because you want to support the Ponzi scheme, more new investors to pay back the old investors, and that's by population growth." But that's fundamentally unsustainable. So the challenge is, how do you deal with a shrinking population but rising prosperity? And it has to be through some sort of automation or many automations, okay? But people are not really talking about that. They're just snapping back to, we just want more kids, which is fundamentally, will continue the Ponzi scheme. And so it's the definition of, for me, it's the definition of the problem that's the most important. But the idea of watching people try to solve existing problems helps me try to define new problems. And I think for me, that's the most beneficial for my experiences, at least.
Thank you, Steve. Edward?
I picked the right end to be on here. Now, I have to say the thing that I was, and it's funny to say I was surprised by this, but it was an extremely exciting 3 days for me. And I'll divide the excitement into two pieces. One's content side, and the other one's like the context or the audience side. And so on the audience side, I have an interesting lifestyle. I go around the world every 6 to 8 weeks. I stop by at least 7 cities regularly, and then add other cities according to business. So I get to see a lot of the world over and over again every month or two. And I have to say, when I was in Europe and in the US recently, I was having these dinners with people who are, deep thinkers and important people. And I really just started to realize how depressing it was to meet them, because there is very little hope and a lot of complaint. And the hope that was driven by science and technology has evaporated and has become incredibly contentious. And I really found my life had changed quite a bit in the last 40 years in terms of turning from a person who could Johnny Appleseed and seed hope around that technology and science was going to make the life better, to seriously defending technology and science and whether it should exist at all. And one of the things I really enjoyed about this last 3 days and my time I spent here in the UAE is that it's a place that still has hope and drive and ambition, and believes that there's a value to science and technology. And I find that very refreshing and very hopeful. So that's on the audience and context side. It's just a happy place to be for me. On the content side, I was also surprised because, in the first 2 days, almost every talk I attended seemed to be giving me more tools and reinforcement for the kind of things I like to build, which is I always like hanging around people who are way smarter than me. And so my view is I'd like to build tools and platforms that enable smart people, particularly ones I don't know, that are out there and will find some remarkable thing through randomness or who knows what, to succeed. And what I really see is an exciting time where every now and then, every 20 years or so, you see this convergence. You see a convergence of technologies and trends and people that looks like we're really lining up a set of tools and capabilities here that is incredibly exciting, right? And I think the first 2 days of talks was a very good sample of things ranging from policy to different application areas to fundamental technologies to new uses of math, new old uses of math even, that are incredibly exciting because we're really seeing a point I saw sort of around the time the internet happened or the PC revolution happened, where several things, not by design, just happen to be lining up in a way that looks like you can pull them together And I think this conference did an amazing job of giving us a sample of that. So again, excited both on the content side and the context side. I hope you guys are excited too. It's been a really great thing. I think it's also a testament to the vision and the management of both the both academic side and operational side of this Audio Lab vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Edward. And I'd like to connect to something you just said and pose my next question. And the next question concerns our environment. So the UAE has ambitions to be an international center of intellectual activity with a high standard of science, but also create an environment where the basic research and technology is transitioned into economic well-being. And ADIA Lab is exactly in this intersection of multidisciplinary research. And so from your perspective, what you have seen in the last couple of days, and what ADIA Lab is doing, what, in your mind, should ADIA Lab be doing to contribute more to the UAE vision? And in order to keep things fair, I shuffle the group, and I start with Miguel, and then we're going around this way.
How is that fair?
I thought fair would be start with me and go backwards. But
No, that was too obvious.
Randomized experiment, right?
Right, a randomized experiment. Thank you, Alex. So I think from my perspective, I work in data for health, and how can the UAE become a world leader in this field? Well, there is data, because there are lots of databases from electronic health records and others around the country. I think that one of the advantages of being in a country that, as Edward said, is from a policy point of view can be agile compared with other bigger countries, is how to set up a system to make that data accessible to investigators in a way, of course, that preserves the confidentiality of the data and the privacy. And I think that the UAE has a fantastic opportunity there to show others how data can be used in an efficient way, so that the results from that research are used to improve the health system, so that the health system becomes a learning health system. This is something that people have been talking about for a very long time, and many of us are trying to do that in other countries with some success, but there is typically policy impediments there. And so this is something that could happen here, and ADIA Lab could be an important component of that. And then it's not only using the existing data, it's how the existing data can be used to generate new data. How to run experiments, policy experiments, health policy experiments. Every time that a new treatment comes into a health system, it just goes into the health system. You think about the US, Canada, or Europe, typically it just goes there with some previous studies, but there is no randomized evaluation of the effectiveness and the safety of that treatment in the context of the health system. Again, there are policy reasons why this happens, how these big health systems are set up around the world, in which the management of the health system itself and the management of the research are separate, when management of research actually exists. And the UAE has a fantastic opportunity, given size and other components of the country, to make this happen, to show other countries how you can evaluate new actions in health in real time, so that the health system is as cost effective as possible. And that is one of my hopes.
Thank you.
Well, when I think of your question, I think of what opportunities you have based on what resources you have, and what you have is. I'll make an analogy to Bell Laboratories, where I spent 9 years. They had a source of income. The income was actually an unusual source It was a utility company, and you're allowed to make a profit on what you spend. And so Bell Labs was an expense. So they get to make 5 or 6% profit on an expense of $2 billion a year when I was there. It's a very different financial model, which meant that they would put more and more money into Bell Laboratories. The deal was anything that came out, they would have to license it for very low fees. But it gave them stability, and it gave them ability to create a culture and an infrastructure that would have career people that would not, have the graduate student turnover of several years, but something long term. So you have the ingredients for all those things. You have financial stability. You have you're not cursed with some of the failings of democracies, like populist movements. And so you can actually create a long-term staying power of where you want to go. And so then where do you want to go? Well, you picked a tool or set of tools around data science, and, computation, things like that. But I would encourage you to try to expand those tools to begin to touch other fields. So I was fascinated by the last one on causal inference, and I was thinking to myself, most of science is driven by your own, the field or the scientist's own personal prejudices of what must go from here to there. But now if you have a completely unbiased view of, and then you can winnow from bazillion to, let's say, a couple of dozen, that couple of dozen can actually, you can look back and say, okay, are you sure what you think is going on is really what's going on, and how orthogonal can you do it? So you can encourage people studying their own problems to say, step back. And maybe this causal inference is, to me, it was actually generating things beyond what normally would be happening in a field due to fashion. Okay, so it will help people be more mavericky, which is, I think, ultimately what really leads to real progress. So I think there's a huge opportunity, especially if you can begin to touch other fields that go well beyond investment strategies. Because the same things that go into investment strategies go into a lot of what you want to get done. And so I think it's a great opportunity. And so you can begin to grow at the edges and try to bring in other people in other fields so that they can, and then in so doing, they're out of your field, so you can take from them what they know. And so, again, a huge opportunity.
I think that analogy to Bell Labs is actually super interesting. It's an ecosystem here, though, so I think defining what the role of ADIA Lab will be in that ecosystem is going to be part of the challenge. I mean, I happen to think, I've been fairly open about this, that the policy agility and geographic neutrality of the region is something to really take advantage of. But I also think because it's a small, compact country here, there needs to be a lot of focus on how to build the incentives for cooperation to occur even within the country. So I think that's an area of spending some focus on to figure that out. There's a lot of people who are very concerned about internal competition, and I think there needs to be ways that we can diffuse that by showing that we can accelerate and enrich all the participants in the ecosystem in some way. And so I think that's why I focused a bit on tool building and platform building, because I think that can be an approach, much the way, Bell Labs produced Unix and C, among many other things, like a transistor. But it's, I think this would be an interesting approach for me to consider. We've already talked about how many of the things I talked about in the health proposal are still relevant to many other fields. The notion of making data silos auditable, policy-friendly, protectable, resilient, being able to be an infrastructure for building better computation and better models is equally applicable to fourth-generation manufacturing and real estate investment and monitoring real estate performance, clinical performance, et cetera, et cetera. Many things can be benefited from that particular infrastructure. So I'm hoping we can find some path to it.
Can I interject? One of the things I need to say about with secret sauce of Bell Labs is you weren't allowed to have a large group. If you were really good, you can have a postdoc and a technician. If you're not so good, you have one or the other, and if you're less good, nothing. And so if you had a new idea and you wanted to move fast and there's a premium, you have to open up the kimono, share the idea, and try to enlist other people. And so your success then depended on getting other really smart people to join in. Very, very different than a standard academic model. And it's still, Bell Labs, you still had to publish and do other things, but you actually, this very structure insisted on collaboration. If you wanted to do something, you had to collaborate. In a university, you want to do something, you apply for grants, grow a big group, and then you only talk to the people in your group and sell them outside. So that's another thing that you should think about, is how to prevent people from growing empires.
Thank you. Shafi?
Yeah, so your question was two parts. One was, what can you do to improve the situation in UAE or to contribute to UAE? And the other one is about ADIA Labs. So about ADIA Labs, I'll tell you something that I think is missing. So there's a lot of focus on, so there's a theme, computation, data, AI, sort of where is it going and how is it going to affect different sectors of life, and while making sure that, things are done ethically. But if we think about Bell Labs again as the analogy, I think what people remember about Bell Labs are the surprising things that came out of it. It's not that there was a clear vision and then people executed it, but sort of surprises that were due to brilliance, or the fact that there was sort of, in some sense, like a play, almost like a play group. I don't know exactly how to describe it, or playground, and very bright people were there and they came up with surprising things. How do you do that here is an interesting challenge. I mean, you have the resources. You have certainly the inspiration. So I don't know exactly how you do it, but I agree with what Steve said before, that in some sense the interesting things about science are not the predictable one. It's exactly the unpredictable one. And obviously, and often when you see people who've really won, let's say, very big accolades, it was because of something that happened almost in hindsight, like accidentally. But they noticed that this was not an accident, it was something to explore. And actually, I was thinking about your comment, Steve, that you were saying that AI is all about the predictability because it's all about probability. Maybe, but you could also think about using an AI tool to define what is actually novel. So if something that you've added into the AI system actually makes it, enables it to do more, maybe that is a way to quantify or to find out if something's novel versus not novel. So we don't have to necessarily use AI in the very kind of clear way that it's going to push things forward only, like to drive better, to make more money, I don't know, and so to have better medicine. There's also some surprising things that AI can do for us, even sort of from a scientific point of view. So I was just thinking as we were going along, it all goes around this idea of how, it's almost an oxymoron. How do you make the lab come up with unpredictable things? I mean, then how could you do that if you could predict it? But it is a question of environment. And now about the UAE question. So this is only 3 days. It's my first time here. I don't really know, even if I'm the crowd, who's from UAE, who's visiting. I can tell a little bit by the clothing, but that's about it. But if one wants to take the UAE students and make them better students or scientists or people who are going to publish papers and make inventions, I'm a big believer in the buddy system. What I mean by that is that it is collaboration, but having like some peer group that maybe excellent peer group from somewhere else with some of the locals, and again, one is to think of how to make that happen. But that, I was a graduate student at Berkeley. I was a professor at MIT for many years. I noticed that really, at least in my field, maybe it's not true in physics and biology where you need large labs, but in my field, if you had a few grad students together who were somehow they clicked, that's where the major innovations came from, not where the professor is telling them what to do. That's good too, being a professor, obviously it's good, but the spark often happens because a bunch of people who have a common language and they kind of do something interesting. So how do you make that kind of group grow here, or groups? That's an interesting question.
Thank you. Marcus?
I very much like everything I'm hearing. In particular, Steve just mentioned that in order to make these big breakthroughs, you rather work in small teams that are dynamic, that are non-hierarchical, that are flat, where people are allowed to pursue an idea. And because you have many of these teams, you can afford to have many of these teams, since each of them is small, you are much more likely to cover all of the space of opportunity. So that's definitely something that is very consistent with the ADIA Lab approach. We tend to think of ourselves more as brokers than as owners. We would like that people from all over the world collaborate. So a lot of what we do is we identify key problems that are important for society, and then we look for people who are working on those problems who can work together. And that would be someone from Zurich, like Michael, and someone from Spain, like Paco, and someone from Vietnam, like one of the winners of today's tournament. So we would like that everybody in the world who is interested in the topics that we are working on put themselves forward, and they are able to and willing to collaborate. So that's what we would like to do. We would like to build these relationships. And as Shafi said, on a peer review, on a peer level, right? This buddy system where really what matters is that people who believe in a particular approach work on that, they volunteer and they push forward. They are not intimidated by the way other people do it. No, they really want to pursue this line of thought. You saw it in today's tournament. I was very impressed by the geographic diversity and the backgrounds of the people. Many people who have never worked on causal discovery, they tried, and with a completely new way of thinking, they came up with winning solutions. So why is that? Well, because they came with fresh eyes. They looked into this problem, and they were not conditioned by what the literature said. They were not conditioned by someone, oh, this is the way to do it, this is the doctrine, just follow, and try to end up on the top 1%. No, they came with a completely new way of doing things, and it was successful. So that's a lot of what we try to do. We try to not be dogmatic. We want to be experimental. We want to put together teams that pursue a particular approach, and then we see if it is going well or not, and we create many of these teams.
In my mind, I think that I agree. It's very convenient to be the last to speak. I agree with everything I have just heard. In my mind, one of the things which we can do is to become a catalyst for the energetic pursuit of important discoveries and important lines of investigation for the local community. We have several world-class universities, even in town, not to mention the whole country, but here is Khalifa, here is NYU, here is Sorbonne, and here is MBZ, and other universities. I don't mean to exclude anyone. So from being sort of a somewhat neutral, if you wish, the lab can create a collaborative effort among the research institutions within the country, TIA as well, of course, and we can pursue a number of problems which are important for the humankind as a whole, but also specifically important for the UAE, which is a relatively small, neutral country, centrally located between the East and the West, and can benefit from its central position and wise policies. And Yeah, I think that given sufficient funding, which seem to be in place, we can this way achieve a lot of successes. The idea which was discussed in the advisory board meeting is to launch a program bringing in promising researchers and established researchers from other parts of the world, from the West and from the East, and sort of spending a year, 2 years with us, articulating new directions, planting the seed, and then, us nurturing the saplings until we have a big forest. And if we were to succeed in doing this, then not next year, not the year after, but say 5, 6 years, 10 years after the fact, we would see a flourishing environment which would be, commendable anywhere in the world. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think I really appreciate the advisory board because you succeeded in 2 rounds and got it exactly down to only 4 minutes left. Perfect. So your timing is excellent, and but even more so, your answers were very, very excellent, and I think we have recorded them because I couldn't take note of all the good things, and after 2.5 days, my brain storage capacity is getting is exceeded very quickly. So I would like to end it here and thank you all for being here, for presenting, and for sharing your insights and ideas and suggestions. And I hope that you, and this is my panelists, that you enjoyed it and you will all be back next year in November for our next symposium. Thank you.
Of course, if I may, as I already said in the beginning, but I want to end with this. Thank you for you, Emily, excellent advice, operational board, Abdullah, Fatma, and other colleagues for organizing this in an impeccable fashion.
Thank you. I would like to thank the advisory board members for your guidance and for your recommendation for the past now 2 years. Really helpful and very valuable feedback and guidance from your side. Thank you so much. But also maybe Alex Lipton, I was gonna thank special people today. You were a little bit early on that. I would like to thank the operations board for their help and support, especially Fatma Al-Mheri for her hard work. But I would like to thank a special person who worked really hard for the past months, Dr. Emily Koch. She was Chief of Staff for the past few months. Emily worked really hard until today to organize, prepare, and make sure that today's symposium is a success. Thank you so much, Emily, for all of your hard work. I will hand it to Dr. Simon to give the closing remarks for ADIA Lab Symposium.
Thank you, Abdullah. And I can just say one more time what has been said already. Thank you to the advisory board who gave excellent advice and has given great directions for the future. I would like to thank all of you who are here for joining our symposium and contributing, for making long trips and spending 3 days with us. And always keep in mind, time is the only commodity that you're spending and you cannot recover. And so thanks for spending your time with us. And of course, I would like to thank everybody. And so Abdullah and I did not coordinate this, so you'll have to bear with me one more time repeating the same things. So I, of course, also would like to thank the operations board, Abdullah and Fatima, and the other members of the operations board. And my special thank you is to Amelie, who has been sitting next to me for not just for the last 2 months, for the last 6 months, and has been thinking about the symposium, struggled with travel and buses, in addition to thinking about how to coordinate this program and putting together the great structure that we all had the pleasure of experience. So thank you to everybody who contributed, and thanks to all of you for being here and contributing your own time and expertise. So just 2 simple announcements. So we still have coffee, so you are still welcome to enjoy some refreshments and closing out the symposium. And then I wish you all safe travels back home. Even if you just drive to Dubai or so, of course, safe flights back home. And I hope to see you all back about a year from now, or maybe even earlier. Thank you.